Good morning, everyone. This is the sermon for January 23rd, 2022, and it is the third Sunday after the Epiphany. It is said that in matters of the Spirit, we can get lost in the past or the future, but it is only in the present that we encounter God. Today's gospel readings reflect the feeling of the new church in the world as a living, active spirit. Psalm 19 says that observance of the laws is a joy, not a burden, while Nehemiah tells of his dependence on God and his frequent prayers. Corinthians then gives us one of Paul's most valued letters, laying the groundwork for the church, the gospel groundwork for the message of the cross and its good news. This is the very same religion we embrace today, a joyous constant since the time of Paul, not a museum-like collection of dusty pages and crumbling temples. We are to live our beliefs, not just recite them. And here I have a couple of examples, 3 to be exact, of variations of how one can live one's religion. We recently received a note from an old friend whose son was in the Boy Scout troop when I discussed public service at that church, especially service to the homeless, the street people, and others in need. Boy Scouts at that age really have had no intervention with people like that. They don't know how to handle them, and they get shy around them. Our friend told of the positive effect a discussion had on the troop when I told them to always, when addressing someone in need, to ask their name and then to give them theirs. Casually, first name only was fine. To do so, advise that person that you recognized his oneness, his personality, his humanness as an equal. To do so was a gift, an acknowledgement from one child of God to another. The second example I have of God's work being done is from our wonderful state of Nebraska. So flat you could roll a nickel down the highway for miles, but a place with full churches and major family neighborly gatherings. Several years ago, our dear friend had just begun to build his farm with its fields and livestock. Hard time and a great cost in money. But the storm warnings began, and you could always tell when the worst kind of storm was coming because the hair actually would stand up on your arms. He managed to secure the old barn as best he could, and he and the family and pets scrambled to the storm cellar. They could hear the roaring as the giant storm roared overhead and tore through. But when they emerged, they were stunned by the amount of damage. The barn was gone, and as everyone knows, winter and weather in Nebraska require a secure barn for stock and equipment. Debris and destruction were everywhere. They were crestfallen. He called a friend from town and told him about the damage and asked if he could borrow his large scrap truck so he could begin the cleanup. Now this is classic Nebraska. Yes, his friend brought the truck, but he also brought over 100 neighbors, churchgoers, and strangers who all worked for 2 days to clear the damage and reframe and construct a new barn. The Mennonite community provided food for everyone until work was done. Religion at work. And one more story, perhaps the best. Perhaps I've told you this one before, but this one includes a priest. Father Norm was an associate priest at my church. He was near the end of his calling, in his 70s, almost 80s. He had thick, white, unruly hair and big blue eyes made large by the thick lensed glasses he wore for an almost clownish effect, but he always looked happy. He was a quiet, modest man of God who had served his Lord for decades in quiet, modest ways. He did not aspire to diocesan committees or assignments and seemed content to live out his days at St. Peter's, where the ladies in the kitchen always made up bundles of food for him, lest he starve. He rarely preached, usually when Father was away, but that day he ascended the pulpit, the congregation sighed, and settled into the pews, and he began. I don't recall the gospel or readings that day, but his topic was an occurrence at a recent diocesan clergy conference held at a large hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Probably all men at that time. The bishop and clergy had a 2-day session, so when lunchtime came, the multitude of white collars and black shirts, a few purple ones too, descended on a long ride down the escalator to the ground floor, street level, where a huge double-sided buffet was set up. The noise level of old friends and new and the general chatter of hungry people headed for food was high. Never get between clergy and free food. Those stepping from the escalator faced a wall of curtained glass doors like those at a movie theater that led to the street. So one then had to make an immediate U-turn to the right to the 2-sided buffet setup. Father Norm was near the end of the parade, still on the escalator, and here his story begins. He spotted in the midst of the crowd someone who obviously did not belong, a raggedy street person, hat in hand, shyly looking around as the crowd pushed toward the food tables, shoulder to shoulder with more than a few clergy. It was easy to surmise by his appearance that an empty stomach went along with his tattered apparel. Father Norm also observed that every single one of the white-collared servants of the Lord was totally ignoring the poor wretch. Norm was indignant, a rare flare-up for him, furious at them. It was their calling, their ministry to aid the poor, feed the hungry, and tend the souls, a basic tenet of all they preached and supposedly practiced. Instead, they were more intent on conversation and filling their own stomachs instead of tending to one of God's lambs. As soon as his feet hit the last step, Father Norm elbowed his way to the last place the man had been standing, but he could not find or see him. He asked everyone, "Did you see that raggedy man?" No one claimed any knowledge whatsoever. Father Norm even stood on a chair, but no sighting was made. He was crestfallen that he, too, had failed the man, really distraught. And then he said, "I realized suddenly then that I had seen the Christ." Dead silence hung over the stunned congregation. I have to admit that for one fleeting moment I thought perhaps he'd mixed his medications, but seen the Christ? That raggedy street person, the Christ? I understood calling out those clergy who so errantly failed to provide, but the Christ? I really do not remember the rest of his sermon. Father Norm had tossed out a lit firecracker that took some time to ignite. I had no problem with the Christ I knew, bearded with a beatific expression, draped in white while walking barefoot across the waters with arms extended as if to embrace us. Okay, and I got the poor man, the leper, the undesirable, the outcast, the hungry, and the ill, but I was unable to merge them into a single entity. Years went by. I eventually left St. Peter's. Father Norm retired, and I found a mentor and a calling at St. Andrew's, which led to seminary and ordination. I remember well the sublime feeling during that time that I was exactly where, finally, I was meant to be in this life. But during those years, I still struggled with Father Norm's sermon, his vision, more than I would have believed. I come from a long line of people who tended others. My grandmother Della, we kidded, fed every post-World War II hobo who passed through Ohio. And her daughter, my mother, quietly cared for every neighbor in need, be it food, a hug, or just her presence. That was the way of life. Now, whether here in Nebraska or Ohio, we do the same. If a neighbor, friend, whoever is in need, hungry, sick at heart, etc., it is a reflection on us if we don't act to alleviate their pain by compassion, sharing, and mercy, just as Father Norm would expect. Isaiah 58 says that our relationship to others reveals our relationship with God, a living, active relationship. It is the Christ we serve when we care for other children of the God who created us. I do believe now that Father Norm did encounter the Christ that day, a fellow lamb who needed care, a brother who hungered, a child who was lost. All are one in the Christ. Father Norm passed on to his reward years ago, and his legacy to me was that sermon, the plain-spoken, quiet narrative of a hungry man awash in the sea of the sightless, and Norm's quest to save him. I know Christ was present, and that he was well pleased with the one who knew him. Amen.